60, I think,
Okay, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome. My name is Rabbi Jacobson. So I see some new faces, so I welcome you to our Wednesday night live bash, as well as the web audience. That's where this camera is. In the Jewish calendar, which is a very mystical and psychological calendar, meaning that it's aligned with our the psychological rhythms of our lives. As I discussed last week at length, and actually doesn't need discussion, we all know this in our own hearts and souls. Life is all about mobility, movement, which means there's no two moments that are alike. A static situation, a static state of being is antithetical to life. And on a basic simple level, just like the heart is always beating, and it contracts and it expands, and we breathe, we exhale and inhale, and we know that this has to happen on a constant basis. You can't, someone will say, well, what's wrong with just exhaling and inhaling once in the morning for the entire day? That's not what life is about. It's a constant state of renewal. And our bodies testify to that, whether we like it or not. So if you think about life in general and said, listen, if life is all about movement, how about your moods and your state of being throughout the day? Are you also equally being renewed every moment? And we know the answer to that is absolutely no, because if it was yes, there'd be no one in therapy, and there'd be no one, you may not even be coming to this class for that matter, because you would constantly be feeling renewed, and essentially always have hope and optimism, and always know that life is a constant state of flux. The fact, however, is when we say we are stuck, people say they're stuck in a certain place. And that can mean stuck physically, but above all, really psychologically. Stuck is the exact opposite of movement. Right? That's pretty clear? Yeah, good. So, in a way, we are, in a sense, our own worst enemies, where there's a part of us that is constantly being renewed. As I said, our life force, whether it's through the heart's contractions and expansions, the heartbeat, the blood pressure, or whether it's through our breath, or as they're related, is a constant pulsating force that is continuously renewing itself. And then when you look at the rest of our lives, very often people are stuck. Even if we're not stuck, we definitely get ourselves in situations that don't seem very renewable. They don't seem that they are in a state of movement. So right there you have, if you need to have a so-called visualization of the inconsistencies, of the juxtapose the movement of your heartbeat and your breath, juxtapose that over the lack of movement in the rest of your life. So there you go, there you see the dichotomy that we all struggle with. That's just putting it in a particular way of visualizing it. So for instance, if you look at children, especially the earlier the better, the newborn child, and a child, especially when a child starts moving about, you see a child is never at rest. You'll not find a child that can sit at a computer screen for 6 hours, for 5 hours, for 5 minutes, glued to anything. Now we sometimes think of that, okay, the child has impatience and the child doesn't have concentration, where we great adults have a lot of concentration and so on. But most of the things that we're glued to actually deaden us, not make us more alive. As I think I once mentioned here, I remember once planning a weekend retreat. I was with my brother. We were planning the schedule and the programming, and he brought his little son along with him, who was just a newborn at the time. Well, newborn, he was 6-7 months. Relatively to where we are today, was newborn. He's closer to the moment of birth than most of us are, and he's a wild kid, which is, as we all know, a good sign. My office, of course, is a what we say, a mecca of paper, meaning it is full of paper everywhere. So this little boy took the liberty, without asking permission, by me, nor by my brother, nor by any of the authorities, and in the entire hierarchy, and began making a mess of the entire room, throwing the papers around, and kid. And my brother was like apologizing, and I said, no, actually, I actually enjoyed it. First of all, it was an excuse to throw out a lot of stuff, and secondly, in general, just to see a child alive was very refreshing. And suddenly, either by accident, I don't even remember, I turned on a monitor, a TV screen, and suddenly this little boy who was running around and crawling around, he wasn't even walking at the time, he was everywhere, not resting for one moment. He gives a look at the television screen, and he gets suddenly hypnotized. In one split second, everything stops. He froze in his tracks, sat down, and just was staring at the moving images. So now the images were moving and he wasn't. And really, it was so chilling that my brother, but both of us, we saw that suddenly a child that was so alive was suddenly sitting there frozen and watching whatever it was, doesn't even matter. And my brother says, shut it. And I shut it. It took around 30 seconds for him to get out of his daze, that the television captured him. And then he went back to his movement. So I remember this became part of our program. Actually, it was a great topic to talk about. So that was it. He gave us the topic, and the topic was: imagine this was only maybe he was looking at the screen for 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Imagine a child in a sustained way continues staring at the screen, not for 60 seconds, but and not a half hour a day. But what is the average? 4 hours a day. Now with computers, it's 6 hours a day, whatever it is, and year after year, and decade after decade. I'm not here to discuss the vices or virtues of television, but one thing for sure I could tell you, that just that little experiment for 30 seconds was a perfect demonstration of what happens to us as we become adults. Whether it's television or other images, what happens is external stimulation suddenly replaces internal stimulation, basically. So here, instead of a child moving about and running about and alive, generating life, he is projecting, or he's allowing other life to project over him. So I know television technology is a great. We're using this technology here. So I'm not exactly suggesting we turn the clock back, but what we call progress is not necessarily progress. If you want to know what really means being alive, look at a child. Because children have not yet been jaded and they've not yet been affected. So their natural rhythm from inside, just like the heart doesn't stop beating and the breath doesn't stop breathing, a child doesn't stop moving on all levels. This isn't just physically. A child is always stimulated. The younger children don't even know the concept. When children start saying they're bored, where do they get the concept from? They get it from adults. Do you ever see a 1-year-old being bored? There's nothing bored, because they're looking at life and they're being stimulated, learning about everything, and they're constantly in a state of wonder. So I know the argument will be, well, at some point you don't have any wonder anymore. You know everything about life. But is that really true? At what age exactly did you come to a point where there's no more enchantment? It really comes down to, as we develop our tools and we become accustomed to the world, that other forces start working on us, and they're not necessarily natural ones. So again, to juxtapose, if you're to say what is being alive is being alive inside and outside. On a physical level, as I said, let's look at your heart. It's constantly in a state of renewal. But psychologically, how many of us can say we constantly feel renewed? That at every moment of the day you feel rejuvenated. We wouldn't then be going to rejuvenation centers if we felt rejuvenated on our own. Because something happens in this material world as we grow older that starts slowing us down. And it's not just age. It's just in general a certain sense of, lethargy, a certain sluggishness that takes over. It could be the natural, the word for it is slothfulness, or other forces, procrastination. Basically superimposed things that really are not natural to life. Is there, for example, anything in the animal kingdom that's a procrastination? Is there anything in the vegetable or mineral world that procrastinates? You ever hear of a flower that procrastinates before it emerges? There's a natural balance, a natural flow of life, and it's constant movement. You look at a tree. A tree is constantly moving. Whether it's the winter months or summer months, a tree is going through constant regeneration. So yes, there are times where the leaves fall, the tree goes into its own so-called slumber, but only to be renewed again. That's also part of the process. In our situation, however, and the humans are completely unique in this, we so-called superimpose something on what the natural rhythm of life. Now, this is not meant to be a critique or some type of make us feel even worse about ourselves. It's just meant to put things in context. Naturally, we should be constantly being stimulation from within, and something that, just like the heart beats naturally, without any effort, there should be something that's constantly regenerating itself. Now, the answer to this, so from a mystical, the way the Kabbalists put it is, that the way God created the universe, created one small little, quirk that turns into this phenomenon, and that quirk is that that though life naturally is a state of constant flux, a constant movement, yet it becomes covered up and concealed, encrusted by other life experiences. So sports, for example, is a big obsession. Many people are sports fans. I don't know if you know this, but the word fan is short for fanatic. But you never hear someone say, for instance, a religious fan and a sports fanatic, right? Because sports is not seen as a form of fanaticism. It's true. Maybe no one will kill others in the name of sports. Actually, some people may. But the idea is that those sports, now the Olympics, is on one hand, we can all wax eloquent about what sports is so beautiful. You see how people push themselves to perfection, how the body can align itself and achieve wonders, and it's an inspiration to us all. Well, if you watch the Olympics and you come away and motivated, and the next day you actually have excelled in your personal life, I'd like you to point yourself out to me. I haven't yet seen anybody that has taken sports as an actual motivation and actually changed their life. So it's nice to project. You have? Okay. So then you don't have to do it for me. Maybe you should document where you were before and where you were after, and see real progress. It's nice and poetic to say that we're inspired. And I'm not suggesting there isn't a certain beauty and aesthetic to an eloquence that you see, whatever sport it is, and I'm not knocking the beauty of it. But in many ways, you could also say it's an escape, because you project your life on it. Others are excelling, and it makes you feel like you're excelling. Like the guy, I remember my cousin who came from Russia years ago, and in Russia he was actually a good soccer player. So he was asking one of my cousins. He was asking, "So what do you do for sports?" He says, "I love sports. I'm a big sports fan." She says, "What do you play?" He says, "Well, I love football." "So what do you do?" He says, "Every Sunday I watch it." So the fact is that watching a war being fought, especially one that has no consequences, in a way, some way gives us the same thrill as if we were fighting the war, except we have no consequences. That's the only little catch. Because someone wins or loses, it doesn't affect you. It may affect your mood. Like in Dallas, if you go to a Sunday, like the rabbis there tell me, you can't go fundraising a week that the Dallas Cowboys lose a game. So it definitely affects the mood of the town and the city. And I'm sure Boston, New York, and its competitiveness and the baseball season, etc., etc. And this, again, is not to suggest that there's anything wrong per se in the thrill or the excitement of sports. Sports is not necessarily a crime. But I remember when September 11th happened, and I was on that Friday, after the Tuesday after September 11th, I was in the studios at MSNBC, because there was a National Day of Prayer, the president announced. So they invited me to be a commentator for an hour during the prayers and so on. So I was there, and who else was in the studio? In a different room, he was being interviewed. It was what was his first name? It was a home run gun. Scott McGuire?
Scott.
Yeah, Scott McGuire.
Mark McGuire.
Mark McGuire, I'm sorry, right. Apologize. Who was at St. Louis Cardinals, and was the season before, hit a lot of home runs before Barry Bonds came around, and he was being interviewed because, if you recall, the baseball season was smack in the middle of the end of the baseball season, and for the first time I think in 100 years or something, the games were suspended, and it was a big thing for America to suspend baseball games, because even during World War II they didn't suspend baseball games because they said it helped the morale, etc., etc. So he was being interviewed, and they asked him, so when do you think we're going to get back to real life and start playing baseball again? So this slugger, this hunk, who says to the interviewer, he says, the mistake is that we think that baseball is real life. This is real life. Real life is life and death, unfortunately. And baseball is not real life. This is what a baseball player is telling an interviewer. So again, this is not to suggest that the game has any value, but to think of it as that becomes life, and that's a symbol of life. Yes, it may be life around us and stimulates your eyes and your senses, but the fact that your senses are stimulated should never be confused with your soul being stimulated. As a matter of fact, the mystics will say if your senses are stimulated, it's usually a sign that your soul is not being stimulated, because the senses are usual distractions. What are the senses? Our eyes, our ears, our taste, our touch and smell. So they're very powerful tools, and they actually consume our lives. Everything we experience in the physical world is with our senses. You either see it, you hear it, you taste it, or touch it, or smell it. Except one thing, which the senses cannot help you with, and that is discovering yourself. Because you don't need eyes to see yourself, and you don't need ears to hear yourself, and you don't need taste, touch, and smell. Essentially, the senses are like a gateway between you and the world around you. If we had no eyes, we couldn't see each other. We couldn't see things outside of us. But as I said, to see yourself, you don't need eyes. And the same thing with the other senses. So if you analyze that a little further, if you were to shut off your senses, it's always good to measure things by contrast. If you shut off your senses, suspended them for a while, if it's possible, if you have the courage to do so. So initially, many people think they would just disappear. But the truth is, you'd be left with yourself, whether you like it or not, and there'd be no other stimulation except having to look inside yourself, not with your eyes. If you think about love, true love, so even though love is associated with the senses, we even call it sensuality, but love per se is not a sensual experience. Love is a invisible experience that can be expressed through the senses. When you love someone, it doesn't begin with the senses, it begins with something that's beyond the senses. You can even say that sensuality is where the senses meet that which is beyond the senses. So the fact that we are able to see someone, that you look at someone with love, or you hug someone with love, or you use your other senses to experience someone you love, that definitely brings the love into a sensory experience, but love per se is beyond the senses. There are many things we do with our sensory tools that have nothing to do with love. So if you think about it, the senses that are so much part of our so-called repertoire of stimulation really can also be a major force of distraction, because you're busy with your senses being swallowed up and consumed. In the Zohar, there's a question that's asked, who is greater? We know that in the Holy Temple, there were priests, Kohanim, and there were Levites. Now the Kohanim served in silence, and the Levites served with song. They would compose song. So it was two ways of so-called serving God, two forms of spiritual expression. One was through silence, and one was through sound. So the question is, which is greater? So the initial answer most people would give, sound is greater, because silence is very quiet, does not pronounced. Whereas a song, you can sense the beauty, you can hear it. It expresses itself. It's a form of expression. And the Zohar answers that the service b'chashay, in silence, is greater and higher than the service through sound, because the deepest experience of reality is so powerful that you can't sense it, that you can't feel it, you can't even hear it. We're coming soon to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, we blow the shofar. As we blow the shofar, there are different sounds of shofar. We blow 3 different types of sounds. And without going into detail, if you want more detail on this, I've discussed it in the past in the book 60 Days. in the section on the prayers, there have a more detailed discussion of the different types of sounds, what they mean. But briefly, the sounds express different types of cry of the soul. And the more sound there is, in a way, the less intimate it is. The more intimate the expression of the soul, the less sound will be expressed. So just give a simple example, which I believe I've discussed here, which is seemingly very a paradoxical fact, and that is, when it comes to talking about things that are superficial and shallow, we can talk about it all day. I mean, just turn on the radio, and you hear, whether it's sports radio or discussions about trades that lead to the sports, out of the season, in the season, gossip, weather. There's a 24-hour weather channel, in case you don't know. When it comes to talking about yourself, things that are very real or personal, you'll find that it's much harder to talk about. So the question is this: why is it that when it comes to things that are superficial and not so personal, it's easy to talk about, and you have a lot of words? When it comes to things that are more intimate, you have less words. So of course the initial answer is because intimate things you don't trust, and you're not interested in sharing so easily. Right? But let's for a moment say, even if it was with a trusting person, you'll always find less words when it comes to the more personal experiences of your life, and you'll find always more words when it comes to less personal experiences. And the answer is a very simple answer. Words are containers, like the senses are containers. And just like a container has a size, there's only that much water that can be contained in this cup. Well, for those that want this cup right here. And if you need to have more water, you need a larger container. Words are containers, and as containers they can only contain that much expression. So when it comes to superficial things that don't need that large containers, that's great. But intimate feelings, deeper feelings, these containers are simply too small. They cannot contain such expression. That's why we have created what we call the language of metaphor. Poetry, music, art, metaphor, different type of metaphors. What does that do? What that does is it broadens the containers. So now you're not speaking so literal words. The words have deeper meaning between the lines. They allude to things. Visual. One picture tells the story of 100,000 words. What is the picture doing? It's broadening the container that you can, you can express something more profound. But then there's a language, and there's feelings inside of us that even metaphor won't work. That's when you see a person cry out in pain or in joy. What's a cry? A cry is so powerful and so intense that there's no container, no words that can express it, and no metaphors. So when a person says from the depths of their guts, they say, oy vey, famous Jewish expression. So if it's a true oy vey coming from your insides, those two words, that one word, two words, contains more than volumes. And then there's a point, what's called kola de lo yishtama, a voice that has no sound at all. That is so intense, you can't even, not even a cry is possible. Tragically, when a person experiences some serious trauma, and no one should ever know of that, is what they call the initial state of shock. A state of shock is so intense that even a cry is not possible. You'll see in any type of traumatic intervention, post-traumatic intervention, you'll always see that there's always a state that has been observed and is no question is part of human nature, that the person can't even cry. They're beyond any type of expression. And then there comes a point where the person can start crying and needs to cry at that point. If they don't, it could be unhealthy. That expression begins. And then comes a point where you can begin to talk. I'm just using a negative example, not because I want to, but because it's the only one really to express, that demonstrates this very clearly. The same, by the way, is true in great joy. The deepest moments of joy, it's the same thing. There's almost no words. It's so profound that you don't need any outer stimulation. I'll just use myself as an example. I remember several months ago, I married off a daughter. I can tell you, without even knowing, I would not anticipate it, even though it may make sense logically, I literally was intoxicated more than any drink I've ever taken, to the point beyond I can't even express it. It was just purely from the joy of the moment. And you should all merit to have such joys in your life. And it's not something you can prepare for. I didn't do anything to prepare. It was just the moment of walking your daughter to a chuppah. And there's no ways to express it. There's no foreign substance that's necessary, because it's all being stimulated from within, from the deepest place. Yet necessarily you say, well, Chassidim do say l'chaim. What's the meaning of that? Well, in truth, that should be discussed, because if it's just true l'chaim coming from the insides of your soul is more chaim than any drink in this world. Your soul is constantly alive. So you could say it helps maybe stimulate the soul. Unfortunately, what can happen is when it takes over and it becomes a force that is an alternative, instead of it coming from your soul, it's now coming from something outside of your soul. Which is another example of what I mentioned before with my nephew, where the television became the thing was alive and he became dead for that moment. So stimulation of the senses, though we all love to hear that our senses are stimulated, is a great thing when it's proportionate to inner stimulation. If it becomes a replacement, then what you have is, I don't want to use the word, it's death, experiencing life around it. So if it's a stimulation that helps so-called ignite your soul, it's another story. If it's a stimulation that begins from your soul and is expressed in your senses, that too is excellent. Not only excellent, that's what we want. You want to bridge the world of senses with the world that's beyond senses. But if it's just the senses being stimulated by forces outside of you, and where you left, nowhere, no movement at all, then you can even say it's destructive, because it creates the illusion of movement, and there's no movement at all. Just because you're watching a movie and you see people, and whether it's a romance or it's a tearjerker or it's action, and it's very stimulating at the moment, doesn't mean you're stimulated. It means that thing is so-called pulling you into its space for a little while, like hypnosis, and then everything when it ends, you're left exactly where you began. This by no means is a critique of drama, of books, of other forms of stimulation. It's only about proportion, it's only about balance. That's what we're discussing here. So I remember I was asked once the question, we say Shabbos is a day of song. Zimra, Zmiris, we sing on Shabbos. Day of song. So the question was asked to me, so what better day than Shabbos to play instruments? 6 days of the week we're more immersed in the material part of our lives. Song, as we know, is the language of the soul. So what better day to play an instrument? Why is it then forbidden to play instruments? And the answer is because there are two types of songs. There are songs that you have to generate from within, and there are songs that instruments generate. So without taking away from what an instrument can do, Shabbos is a day where your song should come from your soul, not from some physical instrument. And when it comes from a physical instrument, it could be a replacement for what you should be doing on your own. So instruments definitely enhance music and song, but on a Shabbos it's supposed to come from the soul, which is the reason we shut off as many senses on Shabbos as possible, because Shabbos is a day where you are 6 days of the week you're immersed in the material world. If you could give an example of a day when you shut off all your senses, it would be Shabbos. To not have outer stimulation, so you could have inner stimulation. And whatever is possible to be done. Obviously, we're human beings of flesh and blood, so you can't shut off all outer stimulation. But as much as possible, that's the reason the Lamates Malachas, that's why we do not immerse in the externals, different types of labor or work, in order for the soul to be active in its fullest sense. And the fact is, when the body is stimulated through external actions, it's harder to stimulate the soul. The goal is obviously to bridge the two, not one or the other. But that's why we have only 1 day a week, Shabbos, and 6 days a week we're meant to bring that spiritual stimulation into the external stimulation of the world. So it's all about balance. So to go back to the Zohar therefore says that the service of silence is greater than the service of sound. Because silence is not silence as we take it to mean sometimes, as being passive, quiet, you have nothing to say, you're shy. Silence can be much more powerful and louder than any sound. And therefore, when the Kohanim, when they served in the temple, especially on Yom Kippur, which is considered to be the ultimate day of silence, when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies and would make an offering of the incense, the Ketores burned in silence. They were incense, and they did not make any noise. Incense, it was a very silent type of service. That silence has a sense of awe and a sense of power. If you've ever been in a true sacred moment, and this can be even watching some beautiful nature, or something that completely you stand in awe of, you usually don't say much. You just take it in. Because if you said anything, or you are suddenly becoming the spokesperson at the time, in a way it compromises the experience. The experience is one where you're lifted to another place. So, at that point it's complete silence. And that's the true experience of absorbing a real experience. It's silence. Then, you come back to live to tell about it, then if you can, and if you're blessed, you can find words to express that which has no words, which ultimately is the ultimate goal, to be able to express the inexpressible, to be able to speak about the unspeakable. When Moses was on Mount Sinai, which is actually in this period of time, he's on Mount Sinai for the second time. So you find he asks God to see his face. Hareini na skvedecha. He wants God to show me your glory, show me your face. And God responds, no man can see my face and live. Now, this exchange is a famous one, but what does it really mean? First of all, did Moses not know that? Moses was not a simple person. He's asking to see God's face, and he needs God to tell him, you can't see my face. And then if you look at the verse, when Moses says that, and this could have well been today or tomorrow, these are the days when Moses is on the mountain, and probably more the next month of Elul is usually when this chapter is discussed, when Moses receives God's revelation of the 13 attributes. So then there's an expression there, it says, God says to him, no man can see my face and live. And then he continues, so I will show you, I will show you my back, but my face you will not see. So the question is, why is it God being redundant? He says, no man can see me and live, it's clear. Then he says, okay, I'll show you my back. But he repeats again, and my face you will not see. As if rubbing it in, so to speak. What's the emphasis of that second statement? So there are commentaries that say the following. They say, just thinking who writes this. One of the commentaries, the Bala Haflah writes like this, that if you read the verse, it's the verse in Hebrew, and I'll translate. But the way that punctuation of the verse can be read is, you will see my back and my face, but upanai, my face you will see by lo yiro, by not looking. In other words, God is not trying to tell him you'll only see my back. He's saying you can see my face as well, but you can only see my face if you don't look. In other words, there are true experiences in life that if you try to control it, you try to own it, you cannot. As soon as you let go, it then becomes part of you, and you can't trick it. There are many experiences like that. I would say the truest experiences in life are that way: happiness, true love, and so on. And of course, ultimately experiencing the essence of the divine. And that's what God was saying. What you can see with your eyes is an extension of me, a manifestation. But you want to see me in my essence, you can only see when you stop looking. Which means when you're not there anymore, when your ego and your interest is not there. And this is also true for human beings. Everyone should be blessed to find the soulmate in your life where you can connect to and not just see their back but also their face. But ultimately, to really see the face of somebody, when I say face, I don't just mean physical face. In Hebrew, the word panim, which means external face, also means panim, also means pnimius, the inside. You know, in the English language, a face usually means the surface of something, the face of a book, the face of a whatever, the surface. You say we don't judge a book by its cover. I always wondered about that. Everyone does, but they tell you not to do it. A lot of money goes into designing covers because people do judge a book by its cover and by its packaging. And I'd like to find someone that doesn't. If they did, the whole essentially sales industry, marketing industry would go down. But we still say don't judge a book by its cover. Okay. In Hebrew, however, which is a much more a pure spiritual language, the word face actually means both the outer face and the inner self. So if you are merit and you're blessed to find someone to love in that way where you can connect on an intimate level, where the essence of you and the essence of the other person can connect, you'll find that the only way it really connects is when you don't try. What I mean by that is that you can do everything to prepare the ground, but the experience itself will always come when you surrender and you let go. That's how it is. Because as I said, the deepest experiences in life cannot be contained by containers. This is in a way counterintuitive what most of us would think, because we're trained to think like this. You want something in life, you have to go out and get it. That's what we're trained. No one's going to do it for you. Who hasn't heard that message? You want a loaf of bread, you go to a bakery. You want a job, you network, you advertise yourself, and your resumes and so on, send around. Anything you want in this world, you got to go out and get it. The concept of not going out and get something sounds very weak to us and very passive. But this is true about every commodity that's outside of you. The only thing that you cannot go out and get is yourself. Because where are you exactly? What shelf? What store? But no advertiser is going to tell you this. When's the last time you saw an advertisement that says that if you want to discover yourself, don't buy anything. Don't buy me. Everything we look at, you look at every advertisement, whether it's for perfume or it's clothing or cars or different styles and different life choices, travel. It's all about saying, you want to look like this? You want to feel like this? This is what you have to buy. Now, again, this is not a critique per se of sales and marketing, but it definitely is it can be a distraction of discovering yourself. Discovering yourself happens, as the Kutzker Rebbe said, where is God? Wherever you let him in. Abraham discovered that to find reality, you have to stop looking, and you actually have to shut off your senses, and then it emerges. So remember this word, emergence. That the real things in life will always emerge. They will never be acquired. They emerge. That means, essentially, it suggests, it implies that they're covered up. They're covered up, concealed, and you have to get rid of the concealment for it to emerge. In Jewish philosophy, there's a firm belief that every human being is a fundamentally good person. This actually counters most of secular psychology, where if you take a Freudian, Darwinian model, most people are seen at their essence, at their core, as being selfish, narcissistic. Freud called it the id, which meant essentially self-preservation, usually of sexual nature. That if a person is left completely to their own, it's all about me, survival of the fittest in Darwin's words. Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, that genes by nature are selfish. It's all about self-preservation. Now that all makes sense if you follow the cardinal rule, survival of the fittest. The most important thing for an organism is to survive. Nothing more important. If survival is the most important thing, that means you take whatever it takes. If you have to crush another, compromise someone else, for you to survive, that's the rule, which is survival of the fittest. The strongest will prevail. And this affects not just nature, the animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms. This is how human beings are seen. I mean, it's quite complicated. There are different psychological models and schools of thought. But most of prevalent Western psychology is based on this principle today. That a human being is essentially an animal by nature. But then, as Freud put it, there's a thing called an ego and a superego, superimposed over this raw need for survival. That tells us, almost like a program, that you have to tame your narcissism, because in order to coexist, or whatever reason, there's different theories. Some say the selfishness of the gene dictates that it shouldn't be always so selfish, because it needs others for it to survive. So basically, even selflessness, in other words, is a byproduct of selfishness. Think of it that way, if in case you felt noble today or something. This is not exaggerating it. You could look it up. There are, of course, we call radical Freudians that really see this in an extreme way, and there are others that's not so radical, and so on. Some even, I've read, that some even argue and question, where did goodness come from? And you hear it all the time. I mean, every few weeks you hear another revelation that human beings' goodness is another, we just discovered how that's another way of survival, etc., etc. Even religion fits into this picture. Religion is necessary because it creates community, it creates ability to cope in times of loss, everything for the selfish gene to survive. Now, I'm not getting into a debate of the merits or not merits. If you feel you like this type of theory about yourself, by all means, you can live by it. But I will just tell you, as an alternative, there's a Torah model. And actually Freud was Jewish, and he had issues with Moses. They say, Freudian issues with Moses. And there's a Torah model. The Torah model has obviously countered this in every way possible. The Torah model states it right at the outset of the Bible. The human being was created in the divine image, period. No qualifications. It doesn't say some human beings. It doesn't say sometimes. It doesn't even say that the divine image is even concealed. The human beings created b'tselem Elokim, period. Then the Torah continues how this tselem Elokim, this divine image, this divine entity, force, was placed into a body. And then we see from the way humans behave that once it was placed into a body, it was challenged to the point where you can betray your own divine destiny. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, they betrayed their own soul, which explains what happens when God comes into the garden and says to Adam, Ayeka, where are you? So the obvious question, as was once asked by a Russian minister a few hundred years ago when they imprisoned, as he was known, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of the author of the Tanya. So he was imprisoned by the Tsar in Tsarist prisons, but he was respected and known to be a great scholar. So one of the ministers of the Tsar, who knew and valued this type of scholar, came to see him, and one of the questions he asked him was to explain to him why did God ask Adam, where are you? Did God not know where Adam was? So the Alter Rebbe first gave him the basic answer that Rashi gives, and the minister, being a scholar himself, said, I know that answer, I want to know what your answer is. So the way the story is told, the Alter Rebbe stood up, and he was a formidable presence, and being invited, in other words, to tell him his answer, he looked at him in his eyes and said, this is an eternal question asked to every human being on earth, not just Adam, to every human being. And the question is, you've lived so many years of your life, and he chose a number which was exact age of the minister, and God asks you, where are you? I don't recognize your soul. I don't recognize your image, your divine image you were created in. Think of it like this. Sometimes you sit near somebody and they space out, and you ask them, where are they? Where are you? You're not suggesting, of course you know where they are. They're sitting in that chair. You're asking them, where's their presence? Where's their mind? Where's their heart? You feel that they've left you. So abandoning the space doesn't always mean you're not sitting in your chair. Adam, of course, God saw where Adam was. That wasn't the issue. They didn't recognize him any longer. It's like an old friend that you had, you don't recognize. Everything you knew about that person that you valued, you don't see anymore. It's been concealed. So that's the way the Torah describes the human being. The end of the story, by the way, is they say the minister fainted because he chose his age, and obviously he wanted an answer, so he gave him a personal answer. It wasn't academic any longer. Clearly, I'm not the Alter Rebbe, so nobody fainted here. That's I also didn't say any age. We just tell the story.
You know the name of the minister?
I wasn't there, but I don't know the name now. I'm not sure. I don't even know if there is maybe you have to look. It's possible there is a name. Why, you want to meet his grandchildren?
Some distinguished one if he failed.
That's true. The question is what happens once he was revived. That's what I would like to know.
Probably nothing.
Anyway, let's not get off on a tangent. The point I was making was that the way the Torah model compared to the so-called prevalent secular model is that you and I and everybody on this earth is created in the divine image. So if you were able to cut to the core the essence of a human being, so Freud, we would say, had it half right. He was right that there is an essence, and that essence drives everything. What he was wrong was he only went that far. And it's not the id, but it's the yid that lies at the essence of a person. So he missed the y, or the yud, the pintla yud, behind the id. Now, I don't blame him, because he only had the tools that he had. I guess he looked at himself, and his mother, and his father, and his experiences, and as far as he was able to get was the id. So people make a conclusion based on their own experiences. But when you think of it from the perspective of the Torah, which is a so-called objective blueprint of a human being, what you come away with is that we are, in essence, fundamentally good spiritual creatures. As one of the mystics once said, we're not physical beings on a spiritual journey. Listen to this, we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. Now, how do you feel? Do you feel that way? Which one do you feel like? I would say most people will say, I feel more like a physical being on a spiritual journey, and I wish I was even that. Some people are a physical being on a physical journey too. But what resonates more? What do you really think when you think on your own? What resonates more inside of you? That you're a spiritual entity in a so-called material universe, or the other way around? So to use the model, to use the formula I described earlier, the things that touch you most are not physical. Love, truth, reality. Anything that is truly real has no tangible, no corporeal shape. So if the most real things in your life are not of the material, so why would you think yourself as a material being on a spiritual journey? Maybe you are a spiritual being, except you're trapped in a material plane and you think it takes over your life. You know, the question I'm more often asked, I share it because it just captures the idea. Unfortunately, it's asked when there's a loss. Where does a soul go to after death? So many of you have heard my answer already, but I still want to repeat it for those that may not have heard, and also it's always good to remind ourselves. So I always give the answer with a so-called imaginary dialogue between electricity and an appliance. The appliance we choose is a refrigerator. It just sounds really good, refrigerator. It's as mundane as it gets. Okay. So here we go. So just use a leap of imagination. It's not physical. Don't think I'm over the wall here that I've heard this conversation ever, but you get the idea. You'll get the idea. So here we go. There's a refrigerator that refrigerates food, right? And it's what feeds it, what energizes it? Electricity. So there's a plug that's plugged into an outlet. So now you switch off, you pull the plug, so to speak. You pull the plug, and the refrigerator says to the electricity, where do you go to when they pull this plug? You know, till now you were giving me energy and I was refrigerating the food inside me. Where do you go when they pull the plug? So the electricity says to the refrigerator, what kind of arrogant question is that? What do you mean where I go to? You make it sound like you're where it's at, and the question is where do I go to? You're a very new entity in the scheme of things. They just invented you 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and this box called a refrigerator. You contain me for a little part-time, and it refrigerates food, and now you're asking me where I go? I go back to where I always was, uncontained by you, beyond you, something you can't even fathom, because all you know is about what's going on inside your box. Now this is exactly the same story with the body and the soul. For any human being to say, where does the soul go to, even though it's seemingly a fair question, is based on a very false premise. That we know where it's at, that's where my consciousness is where it's at, and everything else is some type of unknown, so where does it go to? Maybe we're not where it's at. Maybe our consciousness is one little drop in a big, big ocean of reality, and a little drop can never understand and fathom the big picture. Can the part of something ever dictate the whole? It would be ludicrous. The part doesn't dictate the whole dictates the part. So unless you're convinced that you are the whole, which means you are God, we have to acknowledge that we're just one little part that tries to understand maybe that there's more, we are curious, but it should dictate an unbelievable modesty and humility that you're just one little part. That's what Abraham came to discover when he went out on his aggressive search for God. He thought he was going to find God. And he came to discover it doesn't work that way. God finds you. Because he's the part and God is the whole. So if you think of God, take out the word God if God disturbs some of you. The entire reality. The entire reality dictates the pieces of reality, not the other way around. So essentially what that really means is that you and I know very little about ourselves. And to make a statement that I know where it's at, and I am a material creature on a spiritual journey, you can make the statement, but what is it based on? You have to add one little caveat. You have to add, it's based on my perception. If you add that, no problem. In my opinion, based on my experiences, that's who I am. But I think all of us would want to believe that we may not have the whole picture all figured out. At least I speak for myself. And when you acknowledge that, that's when you start getting it figured out. That's an interesting twist. When you let go, as I was saying. When you don't think you are dictating reality, that's when reality can emerge in your life, because there's room. That's why the Talmud says, I, God, says, and a arrogant person cannot coexist under the same canopy. Not because there's a competition, because there's no room. Certain gurus would insist when their students would come to them, that the first time they greet them, they bring them a cup of water, like this. And the students would come with a cup of water, and the first thing their teacher would do, their master, potential master, would turn, I'm not going to do it right now, I'll make the whole table wet, but they would pour out the cup, like that, it ended up like this, and they say, now, take this, and come back to me when you're like this. Now this was not meant, the cup of water in other words, was not meant just as a exercise of so-called respect of your master by bringing him a cup of water. It was just a demonstration that if you're filled with anything, there's no point in continuing. You have to empty yourself. And when you're empty, we can begin. The secret of all growth in life is, as the Kabbalists put it, yesh, ayin, yesh. One state of being, to reach another state of being, has to go through a bittul, has to go through a suspension of self. If you don't shed one layer of skin, you will never assume another layer of skin. If a caterpillar insisted that it wants to remain a caterpillar and would not enter the chrysalis, the cocoon, it would never become a butterfly. Children have to go through the awkwardness of adolescence to grow into adults. A mother goes through the birth pains to give birth to a beautiful child. And creativity is a child of frustration. The greater the creativity, the greater the frustration that will precede it. Because there's no way you can create something new if you're in that old state. The old state will only yield old states. If nothing changes, as they say, nothing changes. So, cause and effect. If you want change, something has to change within you. If you're still an extension of your old perspectives, then you'll get a product of your old perspectives. But letting go like that is a very terrifying thing, especially for insecure people. Because they're afraid to let go, because if you let go of what you have, you may not be left with anything. That's why it's so vital to understand that a person fundamentally within is a divine spirit, and that never disappears from you. That's why it was also, even for the great Moses, it required understanding. When he asked to see God's face, he understood that to see God's face requires ultimate selflessness. But he wanted to see it, he still wanted it. And God gave him the answer. You want to see it? You no longer can be you if you want to see me. You have to be completely complete suspension of self. And then you can become something greater. This is a secret to all growth. Talk about sports. You want a real lesson of sports, ask any true athlete, as I discussed last week, about being in the zone. You train yourself for 10, 20, who knows how many years. For the moment when you're under pressure and challenge, when you enter into the zone, what they call. And this zone, writers have it, artists have it, anyone is capable of it. But to get into the zone requires the ability to suspend yourself, where you literally feel that you're a channel of something greater than yourself. Ask anyone who's really at a moment of excellence. At the moment that they're achieving excellence, they did not sense themselves. If they begin to sense that they're there, they will be too self-conscious to perform. There has to come a point where you've so trained that the so-called the force works through you, and you can't really even force it. Even those that are very trained, sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes you just don't get there. But when you do get there, it's always a suspension of yourself that allows something higher than you to emerge. Again, the word emerge. Now, what does all this have to do with anything? Well, it has to do with everything, with life. But what I really meant was with the period in time we are in now, which I usually like to connect it with. So this week's Torah chapter, we read, the chapter is called Eikev. It's an interesting name and has many different meanings, and it's a cryptic word. Sometimes Eikev is defined as because. Eikev tishmun, as a result of your listening, I will reward you. But still a strange word, because there are other better words to be used. Eikev also means, the word Eikev means the word heal. When you say in Hebrew heal, it's called an Eikev. So the commentaries, especially the Kabbalists, explain that the word Eikev is used here to allude to a period in history which is called the end of days. You may have heard the expression Eikev de Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach. That in history, the end of history, which is not, God forbid, an apocalyptic end, but an end that leads us to another stage of consciousness and a higher state of being, is called Eikev. It's like the heel. And in a very fascinating way, the Kabbalists explain that history itself is compared to a body. So there's a head of history, there's a body of history, there's a heart of history, there are legs, and there's a heel. Which really tells us that history is not a disjointed, fragmented experience. That history, if you're able to connect the dots, there's a link from the beginning of history to the end of it. So just like a body, if you had very narrow vision, you see a heel, you wouldn't know that it's part of something bigger. But being that we have bodies and we can see other bodies, we can tell that a heel, even though it's the end of the body, is the lowest part, the bottom of your foot that hits the ground. You know it's an extension of, and it's a very much direct link to the rest of you. So the Kabbalists use the body as a metaphor for all of history. That the different stages of history were like experiencing different stages of the development of progress. So when you look at an Eikev, at a heel, there's a paradox. And you'll see the connection in a moment to what I'm discussing earlier. On one hand, a heel is one of the most callous parts of the body. That's why it has the least amount of nerves. It's able to take the pressure, the brunt of walking on the ground. There are people who walk barefoot to the point where their heels literally can absorb all kinds of pain. It's the only part of the body that has that type of so-called insensitivity. It's also the lowest part of the body. So in a sense, in metaphorical sense of it, you can see it as like the weakest part, the so-called, the least spiritual part, if you wish. As, let's say, take the Rosh, the head, for example, is the exact opposite. In the head is the most sensitive part of the body. It has the most senses in it. The mind, the central nervous system, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth. In this little head lies more power than the rest of the entire body. So in a sense, Eikev, the heel, and the head are like real antithetical to each other. On the other hand, an Eikev, the way they explain it, also carries the entire body. What would a head be without feet, without the heels? You wouldn't be able to move from one place to the next. Sometimes this expression is used for Simchas Torah. We dance with our heels. And the Torah scroll is rolled up. You don't use your mind, you're not sitting with a book and studying. The scroll is being carried, but who's dancing? It's the heels that dance. They have the power to lift all of you. So the heel, therefore, is seen in a way like a paradoxical force. On one hand, it has no real revelation. especially compared to other parts of us. And it's almost like an insignificant part. How many of us, we even would consider the heel to be some type of superior force? On the other hand, it carries the entire body. And without it, we can't lift ourselves up to another place. A head cannot go anywhere. You want to lift yourself on tiptoes, or you want to lift yourself up and dance, you need heels. I mean, not shoes as in heels. I mean heels as in the foot heel. So, even though this is a metaphor, and it may sound strange to some of you because using this metaphor, like what does it mean? But as I said, without going into a long, elaborate discussion, when you think of the human body as they say, mipsari erza alaka, from my flesh I behold God. And the human body, as the expression goes, elam katan ze adam, each of us is a universe in microcosm. So when you look at the body itself, the body is a metaphor and a microcosm of everything in life. So in that context, the way this is explained is that we too have two types of experiences in life. We'll call it head experiences and heel experiences. A head experience is one where you're using your faculties to the fullest. Your mind is working, you're alive, you're conscious, you're aware, your eyes are open, your ears are open. This is compared to a very spiritually aware state, what some people would call revelation, a moment of an epiphany. In history, this is usually compared to the generation that left Egypt. The Dardeya, they're called. That's the exact name for it, Dardeya. What's a Dardeya? Generation of knowledge. Knowledge, mind, Deya, Das. Chachma Bina Das. Why were they that way? They were a generation that experienced open miracles. They saw with their own eyes the exodus from Egypt, the parting of the sea, the revelation at Sinai, of course. They were considered to be a very spiritually evolved generation. So when you think of it in historical terms, they're considered to be like the Rosh, Reishe Ha'eda. They're considered to be those that are like the central nervous system, the mind of history. The rest of the generations after that, the way the Arizal puts it, are the body, the heart, the body, the right arm, the left arm. I don't want to go there because that's another discussion. We, on the other hand, are so-called the bottom end of history. Today there is no revelation. Everything comes with hard-earned effort. We may not be highly spiritual, evolved people, but we do have, going for us, is the power of the heel. What is the power of the heel? I know a heel is sometimes compared to a criminal, right? It's called a heel. It's old, I don't think it's used these days. It's more like a 50s expression,
Certainly
heel.
Like a cat.
Like
He's
Dick,
a heel.
Dick Tracy, circa Dick Tracy, right? You know what Dick Tracy was? Tracy was one of the leaders, spiritual leaders of the 50s. They compare, a watch. He had this wristwatch that like it was a computer, like an iPhone, all built in one. No one thought it would ever happen. Now it's about to. Anyway, when you look at a generation like ours, you see a very interesting paradox. As far as technological, medical, scientific development, it's unprecedented. No generation experienced such a high standard of living. The great generation of Moses still lived in a time where you wanted to get a letter from one place to the next, you needed to hire a camel, and that wasn't also guaranteed. And there was definitely no receipts. So you had no idea whether your mail arrived anywhere. It was a world there was no technology. On the other hand, we live also in a time today, exact opposite extreme, where there's also unprecedented internal strife. People say we live in a dysfunctional age, that there's no family that is intact. Some more than others, some worse than others. We live in an age where on a personal level, as much as communications connect us, internally people feel unbelievably disconnected. Almost in direct proportion to external progress is internal progress. Which if you think of it from an outsider point of view, if you're a Martian that came to Earth, you'd think, wow, with such advancements, They must be such an evolved people. They must be the kindest people. They must be people who love each other. They must have very healthy families. There's probably no abuse. No one's hurting anybody. And the exact opposite is true. It's hard to compare generations. Some people say there was always selfishness. True. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. But bottom line is we live in a time that clearly this paradox is very, very disproportionate. Progress on a scientific level does not at all mean progress on a human level. And this too can be a distortion. People say we live in very progressive times, we're so advanced, they almost feel superior to generations before. But you show me a human being who did not receive love from his or her mother and father, and will tell you that scientific progress means progress. I'm not taking away from that type of progress. But if you're a hurt child inside here, and you can't find love in your life, you can't find a little peace at the end of the day, at night, how does this progress exactly help you? Now, can it distract us? Yeah, you can have a lot of gadgets and toys and keep yourself busy. Today there are already records, you can get a cable stations that will keep you busy, 5,000-6,000 stations. Try to figure out how long it will take you to go through 5,000-6,000 stations. And basically can get rid of most miserable nights. Keep you busy. I'm not saying this just humorously. I actually sadly met someone I know from a different city, and he was telling me, I met him because Kaviyachal, so to speak, he was looking for a shidduch. But I realized that's never going to happen. He's a techie, whatever they call him, a geek. That's not the reason. That's fine. But the problem was that he's so proudly telling me he was more excited about the few new cable stations that when I say few, 5,000-6,000, and he was able to get 3 screens in his bedroom and scroll through them. He told me, I think, in an hour and 45 minutes. It's like a record. I said he should apply for a Guinness book. And he thought it was a good idea, actually. He thought I was serious. And he was more excited about that than about the person I was supposed to introduce him to. So I did not put him and her through that misery. I decided I'm pulling out, let someone else read the shidduch. Not that I gave up hope on him, but I saw he's just too busy with his... but he was a soul, he was a brilliant man, who I saw with my own eyes how he's never grown up. And he's just running away from reality. It's not because he loves technology so much, it's because he hates dealing with everything else. And I couldn't even tell it to him, because he wouldn't be able to hear it. He was too smart, actually, to hear it. He'd give me all kinds of arguments that's not true, and so on. So I didn't even go into it. I have enough experience not to know where to pick my battles. But I saw before my eyes just an example. That was like an extreme example. And then you see it sometimes not so exaggerated like that. That was like really, really something else. An hour and 45 minutes. So he gets home, let's say, 10 o'clock after distracting himself for 3 hours before that. And then, by 1:30, where you should usually be exhausted, he'll probably have finished all those stations, and he's too tired to think about anything else, and just falls asleep, and another day begins. Thoreau said most people live a life of quiet desperation.
Who said?
Thoreau. Thoreau. Does it matter?
Oh, I just want to do it.
Want to Google it?
Henry J.
Right. Henry Thoreau. Yeah. The main thing was not who said it, it was what he said. You know what I'm saying? And what do you think about what he said?
Yeah, what he said is true, but I just want to check out if he said anything else.
Yes, he said
Listen.
a lot of things.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's about brilliance. The question is actually whether he lived a life of quiet desperation, is what I would really want to know. But that's another story.
Why? Yeah, the question is what I do with information, not what he did with information.
That's right. Anyway, so I'm sure there's no one here in this room that identifies with that concept of quiet desperation, but you may identify with the concept of loud desperation, or the denial is the other option. Now, the fact is, however, that to go back to the context of here, that we live in a time where there's definitely this paradox, and the truth is, it would be completely misunderstood. Doesn't make even sense that progress should dictate a lot of progress. If science and technology, which is the reason that it's proliferated today, for many reasons, but one reason is for sure because we have a cumulative knowledge. Whatever our parents knew and their parents knew, we know plus more. What does that add up to? To growth, progress, right? So if you have the science of the times of Aristotle, and you have the science of the Middle Ages, and you have the science of the modern age, and you add it all together, you're definitely going to understand and create and relate to the universe in new ways. Now, Einstein himself said that had certain developments not happened before him, he would never have been able to envision what he did. So it's all about accumulative knowledge. So why is it not the case in personal and psychological knowledge? Why aren't we wiser psychologically in how to deal with each other as human beings if we have all that accumulative experience? People have caused each other pain over the generations. So how is that? How do you explain that? So the basic explanation is, people are just selfish. They don't, scientific knowledge makes money. Scientific knowledge makes your life more comfortable. On a personal level, hey, there are consequences, and we become very stupid. We suddenly forget what we've learned. Forget about generations before. Look at ourselves. How many of us repeat the same mistake and again and again? How is that possible? You made the mistake yesterday, 2 days ago. Maybe a different name, a different place. How do you repeat the same mistake? So there is something we could say we're a little crazy, a point of a little insanity that all of us, or we get blinded. When you're consumed with your needs, or a moment of passion, or a moment of desire, whatever you want to call it, blinds you. And your mind may even tell you yesterday you did the same thing, it was a mistake. But that moment becomes so powerful, you just simply can do the same thing again and again and again. That's on one end of things. But the Kabbalists, in understanding the heel of the generation, will say, is because our generation also has the two paradoxes on a spiritual level. On one hand, we come at the end of the body, meaning we have all the power of the generations before us. So the heel does not just a heel, it's a heel of a body, of a heart, of a mind, and that's why scientific developments unprecedented that we have today. On the other hand, the heel is also a very simple entity. It doesn't appreciate or understand what came before it. As the heel, do you understand what the mind is like? It cannot answer yes. So the way the Hasidic masters put it, they use an analogy that when you want to test hot water, you don't put your head into a hot bathtub. You put your foot, your heel actually. Why is that? Well, technically you can say because the heel, as I said, less nerves and less damage, basically. You don't feel it as bad. So you can feel it's hot. If you put your head into hot water, some people do that too, but I mean to say, technically in a bathtub, it's a little hard to do that. I'm even thinking how to maneuver if you get your head into hot water. That would be something. But we do it anyway in psychological, like putting your head in hot water. But, so they use this as an analogy that the simplicity of the heel is also its power. And this brings me to what I was saying earlier about that type of suspending yourself. What the generation of Moses did not have, they were not able to suspend themselves, which is why their great spiritual qualities were great, but they ended up dying in the wilderness. Their greatness was also their enemy. As I think I discussed last week, the greater the person, kol hagadol mechaver yitzrei gadol mimenu. The greater the person, the greater the challenges. So greatness can also become your enemy because you're so consumed with your greatness, there's nothing, you're not able to suspend that. Why did the scouts not want to go into Israel? Which is the reason none of the Jews ended up in Israel. Because they said this is a spiritual place. Why do we need to descend into an inferior material world? So it was their greatness that was their undoing. Had they just had simplicity like a heel, and just say, you listen to what was told to you, God said there's a promised land, they wouldn't have to stay in the wilderness. They were too smart for themselves. Their intentions were very good. Their intentions were spiritual ones. But as I said, greatness can also lead to great mistakes. In a way, our blessing, at the same time our challenge, is a simplicity. We do not have the spiritual awareness that they had. But we have a different thing. We have the ability to be humble. Because if you truly understand your life, think of it. Did we earn this progress that we grow up, that we develop, that we are part of, that we're benefiting from? Here, the first time in history, especially for the Jewish people, but it's the whole world, Jews are free. We do not live under oppression. This is really the first time in history. 15 years ago, there was still a Soviet Union where millions of Jews could not even leave if they wanted to. 50 years ago, 60 years ago, I don't have to remind you what was happening in Europe. You turn the clock back 100, 150 years ago, I don't think there was any, maybe the United States was the beginning, but was there a place on this earth where the Jews were living in Arab countries or European countries? They were either under the Inquisition, pogroms, before that the Crusades, you name it. Here we live without any fear. My father, my mother, may she be well, lived under Stalin. You couldn't sit around in a room like this and talk Torah and just we have no problems with it. Anyone could come and to arrest you. Anything could happen. This is just 56 years ago. So we have a great gift. Now we have to ask ourselves, did we earn this gift? Like what exactly did we do better than our parents and grandparents that earned us this freedom, that earned us this prosperity, that earned us this comfort, high standard of living? We did really nothing. Recognizing that is recognizing that this progress of this generation is a result of the prices paid by people before us. That's what a heel comes to understand. Its power lies because it's the heel of a large body, not because it's powerful on its own. If the heel decides it becomes king, it's not exactly what you want. The heel has to understand that it is the so-called like the front, like the foot soldiers. They go into the battle like you put a foot into hot water. It's like a type of Mesiras Nefesh, a type of acknowledgement that you come with gifts. We are like midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. Now a midget on the shoulder of a giant can see a lot farther than the giant, but only because he's standing on the giant. The arrogance that comes and you think I see farther, you think, oh, I'm as tall as a giant, is the big mistake. That's the arrogance that comes from prosperity, from comforts, the apathy that we have, take it for granted. So our challenge is in a way a dual challenge. On one hand, our progress and success is an unbelievable gift, there's no question about it. But you have to always remember it's not Keichivetz, it's not us that created it. From a Kabbalistic point of view, from a Hasidic point of view, from a Torah point of view, it's a cumulative good that was done over thousands of years, that releases spiritual sparks that accumulate and at some point erupt into progress that we see. It's the arrogance that is our undoing, and you think like we earned it. And the second half of the coin is that when you feel that humility, you know our challenge is, oh really, you have such a progressive life? Can you live up to it in your personal life? For every iPod and for every iPhone and for every other gadget we have, do you also do in direct proportion, are you kinder? That's the challenge that we have. Now the Torah is always positive, so this isn't about a negative thing. It's about understanding life in a fresh way. So understanding the period of time in which we are in history, that's the end of time. The end of time will create these two opposites. You see it in all the signs in the Talmud, in Seta and other places where it speaks about Eikev of the Mashiach, Eikev, the heel of Mashiach, the heel of history. At the end of time, we'll have these two extremes. On one hand, there'll be unprecedented prosperity. On the other hand, there'll also be unprecedented misery. And it's not a contradiction if you really think about it. They come from the same place. Because prosperity that's misunderstood will always lead to misery. Look at it with wealth, look at money, look at what happens to people with money that don't know how to tame the greed and corruption and the sense that you are entitled, the sense of entitlement that comes with it. It destroys families, it destroys the people themselves. It's as exactly as the Meraglim, the scouts put it. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants. So as we read the chapter Eikev,
we should accept the challenge and do these things.
Yeah, I agree. So as we read this chapter Eikev, it also comes in the weeks. It's the second week of the 7 weeks of consolation after Tisha B'Av, and it also is it comes to slowly leads to the conclusion of this month of Av, saddest month of the calendar, but only leads to a month of love. Av and love, that's a nice one. It leads to the month of love, the month of Elul, Anila Daidi V'Daidi Li, and which is really the prelude to the high holidays. As I discussed last week, again the two extremes. The saddest leads to the happiest. And this too is, in a sense, the paradox of our time. And I think it really comes down to, if we could take one lesson out of all of this, is It's a real profound sense of humility that is lacking in most people's lives. And remember, humility is not just about the opposite of arrogance. What I mean by that is sometimes arrogance takes on the shape of feeling that you're nobody. You could also be arrogant in that feeling, like, and someone said, what do you mean, who do you think you are to say you're nobody? Like, look who thinks he's nobody, as the joke goes. You know, sometimes arrogance takes on the shape of being very pompous and you think you're better than everybody. But arrogance could also take on the shape that you're worthless. And you're convinced that you're worthless. And you're convinced that you can't make it. That too is a expression of you have decided what your destiny is. So I think at the point in time where we are, the end of leading to El, it's a time of beginning of introspection. And the biggest introspection of all is it's not all about you, and it's not all about how you think things are, and about your perspective. When you're ready to suspend your perspective, I guarantee you, and you can use my name if you like, that you will have first openings in your life. It's only when you're ready to suspend your perspective. So the trap is we are trapped by our perspectives, we're trapped by our conviction. We're so convinced that we have it all figured out. This doesn't mean that we have to. It's not. I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way. That this is meant another excuse that you're unable to understand things and that you're worthless even in your perspective. That's not my point at all. My point is that it's not only how you have it figured out. You have to realize there can be openings, and the first step to an opening is to recognize, as I said, the ayin be'emtza, that there's a point where you want to grow to another place. You have to let go of something before. It's the greatest challenge in life because we don't want to let go. That's the truth. I speak also from hard-earned experience. I have my own challenges in this way, so I'm not just saying that to all of us, so we're in the same boat. And sometimes it takes a leap. It's a real leap. And for me, I can tell you one of my tricks of the trade is you commit to something that initially you may not have loved to commit to, but once you're committed, you're stuck because you've made the promise. I made a few such commitments lately, and I'm stuck. Like one of them is that I'm going to do Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in Manhattan, which I initially didn't want to do. And I second guessed myself, but that's it. It's too late. I already announced it. And some other things, making a move in the. No, I can do it privately my own way without any pressures, etc., etc. And trust me, a lot of pressures, not just on myself and the whole organization of it. As I mentioned last week, I mean, I'm not here to talk about my challenges, but I just want to share with you that we're all in the same boat. Mm-hmm. It's just a question of where we put our energy. So I will tell you like this: a new year is about to come. You want it to truly be a new year, not just on the calendar. Newness for you, it's time to take a leap. There has to be an area where you take a leap that you're not comfortable with. If you're comfortable with it, it's not a leap. It's your old you just finding another way to so-called experience a leap. It's not what you want. You want to have a real leap. A leap that is that in a sense takes you to another space. And you have to find, it's true, you have to have good friends and support that can help you there, because you don't want to just be alone in the whole process. So see me as a friend. If anybody needs a little help in this leap, I extend my help. My help will be to help you push you, if you want to put it that way. Like I think I've shared with you, I remember when I was a kid, it was in the summer, so I was a relatively good swimmer, but the diving was my thing. Like, I don't know, age 9, 10, I was terrified of dive. I don't know why, but that's how it was. And I remember summers that would go by, I would stand on this diving board or at the edge of a pool, and I'd count to 10 once, twice. All day passed, and I counted to 100 times 10, but I never jumped. You know those types? You keep counting to 10. Okay, I'll do it this time. Not 10. Okay, we'll do it to 100 this time. You know how it goes. You find all kinds of whatever it is. Anyway, one summer passed, another summer passed. Meanwhile, I'd never dived, and I think back and I say, what was the problem? You know how to swim, so you get in the water, you're falling backwards, fine. You know, what are you afraid of? That your stomach will, like, you know, you think of the belly flop thing, your stomach will burst open or something. So don't eat a meal beforehand, whatever. So what was terrifying, and what happened in my case? So, of course, it didn't happen by my counting 10. That wasn't enough. So I tried a new trick. Instead of diving in, jumping in, I'd sit at the edge of the pool, and I'd just this and just drop it. Even that was terrifying for me. That was my phobia. What can I say? Finally, what happened was that a friend of mine had a little rachmanis on me, a little compassion. And yes, exactly. Yeah. So I was doing one of those things in one of my middle of my counts, and count here, count there. He gave me a slap, a push, and I flew in, and nothing happened. How do you like that? But I developed a theory what my fear was. Here's the fear. The fear was standing on the ground is fine. Swimming is also fine. Once you're in the water, you'll manage. The problem was the suspension. You're not on the ground and not in the water. So it's a split second. But psychologically, it's like a thing. You're not in control. Not that you know naturally. Of course, gravity will take over. You'll end up in the water. I don't know if this theory is scientifically correct or not. But that's what I developed, and I've seen it play itself out in many, many situations. I do think that is the issue for us to experience change. That suspension, which is a necessity, because no way you can go from one place to the other without taking that step, and that step has an element of an unknown. And that moment of unknown is a very terrifying thing. That's why, as good parents, when our children take their first steps, you want them to take the step and able to fall. You don't want to impede their ability to fall, but you're there nevertheless to show them that you're there to support. So it's a way of a combination of the two. Maybe we can all do this for each other and take a few dives. And I think we'll all be happier. You'll be happier. I'll be happier. The whole world will be a happier place. So, with that being said, may we all be blessed with a very good year, and we shall continue this class. We'll keep keeping you posted as changes happen, as we are renovating and changing our space. And again, with the high holidays, obviously I'm going to do it in the full glory in the East Village. If anybody wants to join, please let me know, or let Philip or Velvel know. And or leave us your email address and we'll send you all the information. And meanwhile, until next Wednesday, hope to see you all fresh and rejuvenated and having taken a leap or two. And Sarah, I mean you too.
As a leap, I want to do a group study based on your book, 60 Days, Spiritual, and I want to do it literally, like 60 days from the 29th. And I was wondering if there are people in the room that would like to participate in that study group. I have my cards and I have a paper.
Where are you located?
The group will be in the Upper West Side.
Okay, if you give me your email, I could pass it around to everybody here.
Yes.
Anybody wants, they can contact you.
Yes.
Okay, how's that?
It will be great.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Very nice. Good night. Good night, everybody. And look forward to see you next week again. Okay, be well.